She grew up in one of the most closed off, isolated, least understood segments of American population, Amish. She was sexually abused for years, then raped multiple times as a teenager. She's here to talk about that, her recovery, her book, and life afterwards. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is brought to you in part by Breakfast with Champions, holding rooms daily in the Clubhouse drop-in social audio chat app. Download the app today. It is free. And join us in Breakfast with Champions, where everyone gets to see the table, be heard, find new friends from all over the globe. That's the Breakfast with Champions rooms in the Clubhouse drop-in social audio app. Get more details. Download the app today for free and get more details at thebwcinfo.com. Calling us from Minnesota, we have Lizzy Hershberger on the phone. Lizzy, been through a lot, does a lot of inspiring things. I met Lizzy on the Clubhouse drop-in audio chat app, by the way. If you're not on it, you should check it out. It's pretty cool. And when you do, look for me, John, middle initial J, last name Wiley, W-I-L-E-Y, or do a search for @LET Radio Show. Lizzy, thanks so much for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Show. Very much appreciated.
Yes, thank you, Jay. Thanks for having me.
One of the reasons I really wanted to have you on is I grew up in a big portion of my life in Southern Maryland, which is Leonardtown, Mechanicsville, St. Mary's County, and we had a huge Amish population there. And when Lizzy told a little bit of her story in the clubhouse room we were in together, she talked about growing up Amish, and I was like, ding, ding, I got to pay attention to this. It's a segment of society, even though I lived around them as a teenager, and then again, as an adult working in radio, I really don't know much about the entire Amish lifestyle. And it's one that, to be honest, I think a lot of people are very curious about.
Yes, and I will just start by saying that there's a lot of different kinds of Amish. I think in general, people kind of lump them together and think they're all the same kind of Amish. So there's probably over 100 different kinds of Amish, and when I say different kinds, they're typically divided into small communities. And each community typically has their own bishop. So they tend to have their own set of rules. Like, some of them are more modern. Some of them have, you'll see solar panels on their houses. Other people have absolutely no solar panels. And that's in the community I grew up in. We had no electricity at all, no access to hot water, no bathrooms in the house, only outhouses. And just my actual community is called Swartz and Trooper Amish, and that is the community that prides themselves on having the least modern conveniences. And they also consider themselves the true Amish that are left. Like all the other Amish communities have kind of adapted and changed and accepted some more modern conveniences. Like chainsaws and things like that. And in my community, that is not allowed. And it was in a small Amish community in southeastern Minnesota. And my grandpa started it in 1974. And him and his family moved from Ohio to Minnesota. And what he wanted to do is preserve that original Amish, what he thought was Amish, and he had a couple family members move with him and a couple different families, and eventually the community grew to around 100 families, and I think that's about what it is right now.
One of the things I want to make clear is I grew up around Amish, part of my teenage years, part of my adult years. I never had a bad experience, and I'm not one to cast aspersions. kind of find it to be a little bit of relief, Lizzy, when you say that there's these different sects. I didn't know that. And that they have divisions of who's more Amish than who. And it almost reminds me a lot of what happens in the other Christian faiths. So it's kind of refreshing to hear it's not just us.
Yes, and thanks for bringing that up. Originally, like way back, the Amish actually broke off of the Catholics. So if you look at some of the Catholic religious beliefs, there's a little bit of similarities once in a while that you'll see come across. So yes, they're just like, in general, I say they're just like other people. They have different beliefs. They have yet. They tend to be all lumped together, being all called Amish.
Right.
So yeah. So it's. I'm glad you did not have a bad experience. Many people don't, and many Amish communities are wonderful. There's wonderful community members in there. I just, I wrote a book about my story and what I experienced, and it might not be what the general public.
Well, unfortunately, it is part of, and I know a little bit of Lizzy's story, not a whole lot, but unfortunately, it is part of American life, and not just American life, around the world, where we have young women, young children being sexually abused, sexually molested, and it is hush-hush, and a lot of people don't talk about it, and a lot of people suffer in silence, even they're trying to recover and recuperate and rebuild their lives afterwards. That's one of the things that sets you apart from so many other people. You kind of really do talk about this.
Yes, I started coming out and talking about it about 3 years ago. And the way it kind of started coming out is me and a friend of mine decided that we, for whatever reason, had this idea that we'd really like to bring more women together that come from Amish or former plain communities and have a conference where we could have these women share their stories. And it really, in doing that, I myself found my voice, like how I could share my story and how it inspired people. And then from that first event that we had, we've had about 6 of them now, I came home. And it took me about a week to recover from that, and I realized that I really have not ever thought about going to the police and sharing my abuse that I suffered. And from there, that's how I ended up going to the police and sharing my story. And eventually, one of my abusers got charged.
I'm so glad you did. And, it's a deeply personal decision that people make that. And I'm not one of these people that says, I'm going to tell you what you should and shouldn't do, because I didn't go through that. I'm a Catholic kid, and I went through school where I had kids that were sexually abused, and I knew nothing about it, and I never experienced that. I'm grateful I never did. But part of my experience in policing was that we had to have conversations, and I'm going to use a general term, rape victims, in a way that was non-judgmental. I'm just here to get the facts and to help you and to make sure you feel safe. That's all I can do at this point. Everything you decide to do after that is up to you. And people make decisions that I didn't always agree with, but it's not my job to agree.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And thank you, Jay, for bringing that up. That is something that I personally do now. Is I'm a volunteer with Victim Services, so I've taken some training, and I've learned that speaking to victims, it's all, some of them choose to report their case and some of them don't for whatever reason. We're just here to, if somebody wants to talk, and as victims saying, we as Victim Services here to help. And if they choose to report their case, we walk with them through that process. If they choose to not do that, that is their personal choice, because you can't say just, one rule fits everybody, because it doesn't. Some people are not ready to go report their case. And it took me personally almost 30 years to realize that I was ready to do that.
And I'm glad you did. We're going to take a short break. We're talking with Lizzy Hershberger, a very amazing story about what she went through, her recovery process, what she does to help others, and the book she wrote. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Looking to store sensitive samples or substances? A desiccator cabinet, sometimes called a nitrogen dry box, is the perfect solution. These cabinets maintain a low humidity environment to professionally preserve your valuable samples and substances. And where can you find the best desiccator cabinets? Try DesiccatorCabinetsDirect.com. They offer the lowest prices, quality products, and top-rated customer service for an unforgettable shopping experience. Visit them online at DesiccatorCabinetsDirect.com or search for them on Amazon. Return conversation with Lizzy Hershberger on the Law Enforcement Show. Lizzy was a victim of sexual abuse and rape. She grew up Amish. She's going to tell her story and part of her recovery process, in addition to helping people and being an advocate for other women. She wrote a book called Behind Blue Curtains, a true crime memoir of an Amish woman's survival, escape, and pursuit of justice. Lizzy, I'm so glad you agreed to come on the show and tell your story. And I'll be honest with you, when we have guests like you on a show, it brings up emotions in me that makes me very angry about what they went through. So if I get stumbling and I don't know what to say or get really quiet, that's why. I hate that these things happen, but I think that a lot of people really need to understand they do happen a lot in all segments of life. But for people that have gone through these things, that they can have a life they decide they want to have afterwards, in spite of. Is that a fair assessment for you?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it is. Many of us who have went through abuse, it's almost like it has to be a process in figuring out how am I going to live with this, because it will never go away. You have to just figure out what you can do. And for some people, it is, there's lots of different ways people deal with it. But my way is helping others has helped me heal in more ways than I can probably explain. It's just so comforting for me to be able to be there for somebody else, and when they're walking through difficult times, and it makes me feel better in the process, and it makes me feel like I'm doing something for others. Yet in return, I get more. I feel more. I feel further from my abuse because I was able to help others, and I've just healed so much from it. And helping others has helped me more than probably helping them.
There's an old saying: if you want to feel better about yourself, if you want to have a better life, dedicate your life to helping others. Number one, it gets us out of our stinking thinking. And I don't say that as a horrible thing. I mean, Lizzy, when I think of the past, I tend to think of remorseful, resentful things about things that happened to me. When I think of the future, I worry about what's going to happen. When I live in today and I dedicate my thoughts to how I help those around me, I become less self-centered. I become less involved with me, and I get some relief. So I get what you're saying. When did this abuse start for you?
The abuse started, unfortunately, at a very young age. I don't have a memory of not getting sexually abused. So unfortunately, I believe it started for me as an infant. Now, to what extent, I don't know. But because of all the therapies I've went through, one of the earliest memories I have of getting abused is that I went home and got my pacifier. So I know that I was extremely young. But thankfully, as I got a little bit older, by the time I turned 9, the sexual abuse from my uncles quit. And that was because there was a traumatic family event, and they also, both of them, ended up getting married. And so I think that I had a period of time after that where things were maybe, pretty good. My home life was never wonderful. But then as I got older, I ended up going through school through 8th grade, and then it ended at 8th grade. And during that time, we never got any sex education. And I never, in any of those years, I didn't talk to anybody about what had happened to me as I was a child. And I don't remember ever, obviously I knew it was something shameful and something bad that had happened or was happening, but I didn't know how to talk about it. And, it makes you wonder, why didn't I ever just say something to my mom or to my sister? But I just didn't. I always felt like, I was threatened, number one, that I should never share what is happening, and that it was always my fault. Like I did something wrong to deserve that punishment. So it just became this thing that I was always hiding something. But as I turned into a teenager, I became very rebellious and I was just very angry and hurt. And I didn't know how to talk about this. I didn't know how to explain, what my feelings and things were, because that is one of the big things is you don't talk about your feelings. You don't talk to your family about anything in that you're sad. You just don't talk about the things. You just suck it up, move on, and things will get better. But unfortunately for me, that was just almost impossible because I'm carrying all this stuff that happened to me as a child right into my teenage years, and that's when things, got even worse.
You brought up a great point. We didn't talk about these things. I didn't talk about anything with anybody outside of the family. And even in the family inside, we didn't talk about it. I grew up in a military family, and no one wanted to be the person that upset the apple cart. It didn't matter. Was my fault or not, didn't matter. Mm-hmm. But so many of the children I worked with in police work that were victims of sexual abuse, physical abuse, whatever kind of torture, which a lot of it was, for lack of better words, they all felt like it was their fault. And it didn't matter if they were 5 years old, 7 years old, 9 years old. They felt like they did something wrong. And one of the hardest things to get through these people is it's not your fault. You didn't choose this. You got an adult or a teenager manipulating you to do things that you would never do, that don't even come into your mind at that age.
Yeah, and I really struggle with that. How and to me, it just makes me extremely upset. When I think about the adults that took advantage and were able to plant that in my mind, and obviously it happens every day. Adults or young teenagers can plant this in a child that it is their fault. And the guilt that you carry with yourself, because you just think if you were to, if I hadn't been at that place at, as the wrong place at the wrong time, or in my case, often it was I didn't work fast enough, or I didn't clean something well enough. It's always all these different things. And then there's so much manipulation that goes into it also. Like, if you do this for me, you will get to listen to the radio. That was in my case. They bribe these kids. And when you're so young as a child, oh my goodness, the mind games that they can play it just makes me angry when I think about how adults, how can you do that to a child? I totally don't understand.
I don't know, and it's kind of thinking that just doesn't logically make sense, and I gave up trying to figure that out a long time ago. When we return, our conversation with Lizzy Hershberger, she's going to talk more about her story, what she went through, the sexual abuse, the rapes, what she did afterwards, the book she wrote, and more importantly, how she developed and built the life she has today. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back.
First thing in the morning on my phone, I join the Breakfast with Champions morning show in the Clubhouse social audio app. Both are free. I can grab my coffee, no makeup, no hair to do, and connect with people live from all across the world to jumpstart my day. Join us in the Breakfast with Champions rooms in the Clubhouse social audio app.
Online at www.thebwcinfo.com.
Of all the radio stations in the United States, there are no other shows like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And on Facebook, there's only one official page. Do a search on Facebook for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And be sure to like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. Back to our conversation with Lizzy Hershberger on our Law Enforcement Show, calling us from Minnesota. She grew up Amish, and she was the victim of sexual abuse from a very young age and then raped multiple times as a teenager. She'll talk about that in a few moments. She does a lot of work to help other women who have been victims of sexual abuse. She wrote the book Behind Blue Curtains, a true crime memoir of an Amish woman's survival, escape, and pursuit of justice. For winter break, Lizzy, we're talking about how people can do this to children, and it doesn't make sense logically. One of the things that I tell people all the time is, and rightfully so, we worry about the boogeyman down the street, the guy in the car, hey, can you help me find my kitten, all this other stuff, I'll give you candy. Yes, those are threats. That is not the biggest threat to our children. The biggest threat to our children are relatives, family friends, and babysitters. These are the people that are most likely to sexually abuse your child. And whether people want to realize that or not, no one thinks it'll happen to them or their children, but it does. And it happens in every walk of life. And I'm sorry that it happened to you, and I'm sorry it still happens today.
Yes, thank you. That brought up a great point. So when I became a parent, that was one of the things that I absolutely focused on. And I hadn't even healed or processed any of mine, but I knew that the people that are closest to my children and have the most access, that those are the most dangerous people. And I watch my kids, and I know you can't watch your kids 24 hours a day, but I was extremely cautious, and I did everything in my power not to let anything happen to my children. And I know some parents do the same thing and things still happen. Yes, but if you're just aware of it and aware of so many things you can avoid, like you said, you think that it's the boogeyman or people like that are going to, after your kids. It is inside relatives and close babysitters and people like that have access to your kids. So I always say I hope that my kids will find some sort of balance, and as I become a grandparent, that they will be a little bit more, because I was so extreme. Like, I hardly let my kids have sleepovers. I mean, or the people, I was just so cautious of everybody. Everybody I thought was a pedophile, that I grew up with way too many of them, and I just didn't trust anyone. So I hope my kids can go back to maybe a little bit more of a happy medium where there are lots of good people out there, and lots of people now. Like for my kids, I feel like I could stop that generational curse, because that's what I call it, because it was happening to my parents and, it just in my uncles and my relatives. So they repeated the same pattern. I hope that I broke that pattern, that they now can go on and form much healthier families and child. Their children will be in a different place.
We want people to have a good, healthy respect for fearful things, and that most of life is not fearful. Most of life is not bad. And most of the people that you encounter are great people. I want my children to have that, and they have that. They're young ladies. They're 31 and 32, and they are phenomenally well adjusted. And their mother did a great job. I can't really take credit. I try to, but that's going to be braggadocious. But you also talked earlier in the conversation that things stopped when you turn around 9 or 10 with the sexual abuse. But when you were a teenager, things took a drastic turn.
Yeah, so I'll start up. So I finished school at 8th grade. That is the rule that the Amish have. You don't go to any further education than 8th grade. And after that, in the 70s and 80s, when I was growing up, all the Amish girls would either work at home then on their farms, or they would go out and help other families, because you were not allowed to go out and have like a job at the grocery store or at a local factory. So I started working for other families, and one of the families, unfortunately, that I started working for were friends of my parents. I remember them before they had gotten married, and they were actually, both of them were relatives of my parents. And so they sort of got married, started having kids, and then they moved to a place not far from my parents, and they were working for a non-Amish farmer, meaning they did chores and milked cows for them, and in return they lived rent-free or whatever there. So they asked me to come over and stay with them. And it was something where we called a mod. So I would be required to, whatever the husband and wife told me, I did. I either watched, they had 4 little children by then. I watched the kids morning or evening while the wife went in the barn, which was a little bit up the road, and milked cows, or vice versa. The wife would stay home. Often in the evening, she would stay home because she would put the kids to bed then, and things like that, while I helped the husband milk cows. And milking cows was done with, there was electric in the barn, so it was done with milkers, and there's a radio and things like that. And the thing was, I grew up with him. I knew who he was. But what happened is he started the whole grooming process, and it was over a period of about 6 months, and I turned 14, and as I was there, it got to the point where I felt like he was my only friend, because he had really turned it around, really turned my parents against me. And remember my whole experience as a child already. I had been abused, so I was suffering from all just kinds of things. And so eventually I thought they were both of them were my only friends. And what he did is he eventually, he raped me. He made it sound like it was something that, that was basically okay. It was something that I wasn't supposed to talk about, but it was okay. And I remember the night that it happened, immediately afterwards, I again blamed myself. I was like, well, why didn't I leave the barn just a little bit earlier? Then I would have been out of the barn, all these different things. And then it became this Stockholm syndrome, if some people know about that. It is this process that, like I said, he seemed like he was, my friend, and, I could talk to him about anything. And in this whole time, his wife, the same thing. It's just that I didn't talk to his wife. And eventually what happened is a couple of people, adults in the community, one Amish and one non-Amish, did basically walked in the barn and seen there was something going on, something, I say seen. There was whatever they seen. Obviously he was a married man with 4 children, and I was the hired girl. They seen something. None of those people, to my knowledge, came forward. But when the Amish guy happened to came in one morning early to use the telephone, that made my abuser quickly go in front of the Amish church and confess. And when you go in front of the church and confess, you're going to receive less of a punishment, and it made him look better if he confessed to having inappropriate contact with me. Now, to this day, I don't know what he confessed to, because I was not a community member. He was. So he confessed to something, obviously. And then my parents said, I don't need to go work for them anymore.
How old were you when this was going on?
14. I was 14 years old.
People need to understand that there is, and I'm not an expert in the laws in every state, but there's no consent with an adult and a 14-year-old. It's impossible. It's always rape. I'll repeat that. Mm-hmm. When an adult has forcible sex, whether it be physical force or enticement or whatever, with a 14-year-old, it is always, always rape. We're talking with Lizzy Hershberger. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we're going to talk about her pursuit of justice, her book, her life afterwards, and so much more. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk radio show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. Newsbreak is your #1 local news app for current events, free live news for you and your community. Download the Newsbreak app today for free, and be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk radio show and podcast on the Newsbreak app.
Breakfast with Champions is the tool I use in the morning to get myself ready to face the world. There is so much negativity as you move about your day from traffic to politics. The conversations are motivating and inspiring, and I can face the world with a positive attitude. So join us in the Breakfast with Champions rooms. Download the Clubhouse app today for free and join us soon. Online at www.thebwcinfo.com.
Returning our conversation with Lizzy Hershberger. She's calling us from Minnesota. She was sexually abused in the Amish community as a child and was raped as a teenager. And she's also authored the book Behind Blue Curtains, a true crime memoir of an Amish woman's survival, escape, and pursuit of justice. Lizzy, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on the show and talking about an extremely difficult subject. I'll be honest, I have no idea how to have these conversations, so I get really quiet. And you're doing a great job telling the stories without getting knee-deep in the weeds of the trauma. One of the things you said earlier is you wound up going to a conference as an adult with other women, and that's when you realized you needed to do something, and you began a pursuit of getting justice for your rapist.
Yes. I think it was the process, multiple things, but the process of sharing my story in front of a room of women that later came up to me and were, would say things like, well, that happened to me, or they could empathize with me. And I should say that, empathy, right? So I came home from that, and I ended up talking. I mean, there's a whole process, but I ended up talking with some other people, like my sister, and at the same time, I ended up being a school board member. And unfortunately, there was a local incident that really put me into this mindset of that I had to do something. And if I didn't report it, I felt like he would most likely reoffend or had reoffended. And I actually didn't think that I would be able to have, there would be no charges because it had almost been 30 years later. But in Minnesota, like you said, every place has different laws. But in Minnesota, yes, a 14-year-old cannot consent to a 28-year-old. So it was rape, and it was also, they could charge him because he admitted to being my employer because I was there working for them. So under that law is how they could charge him. And unfortunately, the laws in 1989 had to be used to charge him. So he initially was charged with quite a few counts, but then he made a plea offer. And the plea offer was he got, like 45 days in jail and 10 years of probation, which is nothing. But the point, I think, was made in the Amish community that no matter how many years ago your crime was, you can be charged with that, and that it was wrong. Because remember, the entire time, the Amish community called this an extramarital affair. They blamed me for enticing a married man to this kind of activity. And that ultimately is still what some people believe, but it is something that some people who have educated themselves and are a little bit more aware is no, like you said, you cannot consent. It was not, number one, it wasn't appropriate anyways because he was a married man. So it is something that we have really, I think the community in general has really, some people in the community have really had their eyes opened, and there's unfortunately there's cases going on right now in the community, but they're a lot more aware that you can come forward, and they're very cautious, I think, now. I wish I could say that there's no abuse or anything happening. But we know it still is. But
we know for certain that it still happens, and it's not just in that community; it's everywhere. And
everywhere. Mm-hmm.
I want to say this: anyone that can think that a 14-year-old, 14, when I was 14, I was very much a child, and I may have had a beginnings of a grown man's body, but I was very much a child, and I thought of childish things, and I was into models and everything else. This was not something that was on my radar. So if people think that somehow or another a 14-year-old entices someone to rape, that is just not physically possible. And I don't know how to get through to people. I just don't. And when people present themselves that way, I don't even talk to them because it's not worth my effort. You can't have a conversation logically with someone who doesn't use logic. It's like administering vaccine to someone who's already dead. It doesn't work. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I applaud you for having the courage to bring charges against them, because at 30 years since it occurred, that's tough. And at 14, when this occurred, and in an Amish closed society, that'd be really tough.
Yes. And thanks for bringing that up. I think the fact that one of the things that the reason they could charge him, because I had kept a diary. So in the diary, I made these distinct marks in there. So that's how they could also count off. And we estimated how many times it was. And it was something that I am really thankful that I went through. And probably the reason I'm mostly grateful that I went through the process is because I want other women to know that if something happened to them years and years and years ago, if you want to go through the legal process, you might be able to. Because sometimes I think there's so many statute of limitations and laws like that. But I did it, and I was able to have him charged, and he has to, now deal with the consequences of what he did years ago. And it has received, it's been received, still in the Amish community, that he should never have gotten punished for a crime he committed that many years ago because he was punished in the Amish church.
Look, I'm an old-fashioned man. I'm an old-fashioned father. If I found out something happened to my daughters when they're 14 and they're now 31, you would never see a wrath of vengeance in the movies. The movies you see were like, yeah, I'm going to come after you. That guy, that would be me. So I applaud everything you've done. But what I find really inspiring, to be totally honest with you, is so many people that go through horrible things like this, Lizzy, self-destruct. There must have come a point where you decided, I need to do things to build the kind of life I want to have for me and my family. And that's a process, I'm sure, that's still ongoing for you. But what was the impetus for you to make the decision, look, I'm going to do things differently?
I think it was my children. I really think it was my children. When I started having kids, I knew I wanted them to have a different life than what I did. And I think that's really where I maybe unconsciously was aware of doing it years ago. But as you said, it is still a daily thing that I do. And now, I have my, kids are getting older, and I can just, I can really lead with it by example, I guess, is for others to see that, yes, bad things happen to me, but I don't have to sit here and, like you said, self-destruct or in a pity party, feeling sorry for myself. I am trying to help others and inspire others, whoever, whatever walk they've went through. I'm here to help if they want some help, and I just try to lead by example now.
And you wrote a book called Behind Blue Curtains, a true crime memoir of an Amish woman's survival, escape, and pursuit of justice. Was that kind of therapeutic for you when you wrote that book?
Yes, Jay, it was. It was very therapeutic. And I say I wrote so many pages that never made it in the book, but it was just so helpful. It was so, like, I could put everything together, and thankfully, I had Molly Eakin that came in and helped me really put it in a great form where it's easy to read, and we wanted to keep it really simple. It's not graphic, but it gets the reader to still see what happened, and we are really glad Nasset Press published it, and I am very excited for where the book is going. I
would probably have tear-soaked pages writing something like that if it was my life, my story. But I get the therapeutic part of it, the cathartic part of it. Where can people get more information about your book?
Go to lifebehindbluecurtains.com. That's my website. And they can go on Amazon and just Google Behind Blue Curtains, and they will find it. It is also, they can look me up on Facebook, Twitter, all those Instagram social media links. And
you are doing a lot of other public speaking, a lot of other things as well, right?
I am. I'm the co-founder of Voices of Hope. I founded that with my friend Dina Schrock, and we do conferences for women twice a year right now. And yes, I do speaking engagements. I do volunteer with victim services, and just trying to be out there and helping wherever I can. Just trying to bring a voice to people that haven't found their voice yet.
Check her out online, lifebehindbluecurtains.com. Lizzy, thanks so much for being a guest on the show. Very much appreciated.
Yes, thank you, Jay, for having me. It was a pleasure.
Get access to free podcast versions of the show and more on Facebook. Do a search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and be sure to click like. I'd like to thank our guests for coming on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is a nationally syndicated weekly radio show broadcast on numerous AM and FM radio stations across the country. We're always adding more affiliate stations. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, which is always free, please do me a favor and tell a friend or two or three. I'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and Podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.